Hello, everybody. My name is Jebila Okongwu, and I am one of the artists who's in the group show, which is entitled Friends of Friends of Friends. And this is currently at the Schloss Museum in Linz, in Austria. Unfortunately, the exhibition is closed at the moment because of COVID at the end of November. Okay, so you'll have a chance to see it then. The exhibition is, oh, there's Nick. Hey,
Hello.
how are you? Good to see you.
Yeah, nice to see you too.
Yeah, great that this actually worked. I was worried that it was going to be hard to connect up there, but it seems to have gone well.
Yeah.
Great. So where are you at the moment?
Currently in Brooklyn,
Okay.
dealing with post-election emotions.
Yeah, that must be an exciting time to be there.
Definitely. People were dancing in the streets was kind of basically what all of us were doing. So
Great, great, wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm in Rome. I'm on the other side of the Atlantic.
Amazing.
Yeah, so
Is that where you primarily live?
yeah, I live and work here. So, but I'm actually British. I'm British, half British, half Nigerian.
Okay.
But yeah, for the moment, I'm living here.
Gotcha.
Great. So I was just talking about the show, just as I went live, how it's curated by Ollie Epp and Andrea Emelife. So we're very lucky that those guys invited us to be part of it.
Definitely.
And yeah, I was mentioning the shows are closed. I was lucky enough to go. I saw the show. I went to the press opening. So it looked really, really great. And we're in the same room together. So it's a very big room. So our work is sort of up next to each other, which is really nice because there's a lot of, a lot of interesting things happening in both of our works, which is, I think that's why they put them so close together, because there's a lot of similarities happening there.
Definitely. And I think, probably the reason we're doing this talk right now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So why don't you, I guess for me, in terms of what I would like to know more about your work is, the relationship to the symbol of the banana and that, I guess, the diaspora of that export.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So basically the bananas, it's the base motif in my work. And when I came up with that idea, I was actually thinking about the concept of exoticism and how often when people meet me for the first time, my name is Jebila Okongwu, is a strange name. And I sort of have this look which no one can place where I'm from. So they always say, oh, you're so exotic, knowing that I'm half Nigerian, half British. So I was thinking, well, that would be, a nice idea to sort of play with, this concept of exoticism and personal identity, which, of course, I don't feel exotic, and neither does anybody else who comes from Africa or the Caribbean or South America or from wherever. But exoticism is actually a Western construct, which is given to the other. And that is sort of problematic in a way because it's sort of the origins of racism. And so I thought it could be a very interesting idea to deal with. And so I was thinking, how can I represent this exoticism in a way which is very simple? And I thought, well, the banana is sort of an exotic fruit. And it's got just so many associations with it, It comes from exotic countries. The boxes that they're shipped in have exotic colors with exotic graphics. There's history of, and also the banana boxes come back from the places where the African slaves originally went to, They come from South America, the Caribbean, and Africa, where so there's they're retracing these slave routes. So there's this idea of the history of slavery and also current day migration. So there's many things loaded into that banana. So it's very fruitful to sort of like work with.
Totally. it's also like a hyper masculine symbol. At least.
Yeah, yeah. Of course, that's another idea. I'm sort of dealing with expectations of Black masculinity. So that's another one of the associations, which is important.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And with your work, sorry to interrupt there, but it was sort of at the same sort of level. I was thinking about the idea of denim, which to me, it seems to be like the base material of your work, one of the base elements. Definitely. And I was really struck when I was at the exhibition and I was looking at the work. So the one with the key ring and with the little desert scene painted on, just the detail you've gone cutting the denim into sort of slices, which seem to be like 1 millimeter wide. And it's sort of at the same, it's very painterly the way you use it. But I was sort of very interested in this idea of denim, and what does that mean to you?
Well, I think, that's kind of almost a direct relationship between our work. It's like, because I think about, a lot of my work has to do with like, American identity and like, what does the West actually mean? And like, what are more current symbols of the West, and sort of unpacking my own history because, slavery is kind of like what built America, you know what I mean? And cotton and indigo were the early cash crops of slavery. And so that kind of symbolism, I think, has become almost whitewashed in American culture, where denim has become like symbolic of the rustic cowboy or, like fashion. It's sort of been like that symbolism of it has been erased, and it's kind of like taken on these different forms of revolutionary, or like, it's like, what's his name? I'm totally blanking. He started Apple Computer.
Which one was it?
I know, I can't believe we're forgetting it. Steve Jobs.
Yes,
like putzing around in New Balances and like blue jeans and like stuff like that. So it's kind of like taken on this counterculture thing. So I'm like, I guess, interested in that type of like, the kind of shame and things like associated with like underlying shame and things associated with masculinity, and how those things sort of like are playing out present day. So I kind of like look at America as like a deeply sorrowful place, if that makes sense. And we've kind of been like all suffering, at least very visibly for the past 4 years, under like some toxic masculine ideals. You know what I mean? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So denim there's more of a negative connotation there with that denim. It's sort of, I was thinking it sort of, to me, it sort of seemed there was a bit of nostalgia there, and almost joyous as well, that this sort of the love of the denim.
Yeah. I mean, things are it's obviously things are more complicated than just like negative or positive. And things, I would definitely say that about like being an American, you know what I mean? Certainly freedoms that I get, or benefits that I get, but also at the same time, like, they come at darker costs and things like that. So it's like, it's sort of very complicated, as I'm sure like anyone has with their own identity, their history, their own culture. It's like, how do you define yourself against it? How are you part of it? What do you want to throw out? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I guess what about denim as a material? Do you think, because in the same way, I trained as a painter, and I had a big problem with like oil paint and brushes, because I thought, what am I doing here painting with these Renaissance tools and these Renaissance.
Totally.
And so I was looking a way out of that. I wanted to make art, but I thought it doesn't seem really appropriate that here I am using oil paint. So my big discovery was finding the sort of banana box, which is the main material that I work with. So they sort of, for me, have come to replace oil paint. And I've been able to sort of, at first I started making collages with banana boxes and using them solely as my material. And in the same way, you seem to be using denim in a very sort of painterly way as well. And it almost seems as if you're claiming the material as a material, which sort of it's a sort of confrontation with art history, because you're denying everything that's come before, and you're using a material like the arte povera artists used. They used sort of the refuse of daily life, and they made it theirs, and they sort of started a new artistic language that way. So I was wondering if you sort of, do you use denim in sort of that way as well, sort of the material sense?
Definitely. It was kind of like one of my neighbors of my studio building was moving out, and he kind of was he was throwing away. He was a fashion designer, and he was throwing away tons of stuff. So I sort of actually found denim in this aha moment in a dumpster.
Right.
And I was like, oh, I was making all this work about America, and I was like, oh, I should just, here we are. Okay.
Great. That's the same way I found the banana box. It was thrown out in the Campo di Fiori market after the market day. And I just saw the box there, and it was for me the same aha moment when I just saw it, and it made sense.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, I think, when you start just looking around at what's around, just looking around at what's like ubiquitous or things we find everywhere, and you start sort of like unpacking some of the symbolism or history, because I think it's very common we just go through life like not paying attention. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think like that's one of the great things about art, is that it can sort of open up your vision,
right,
so to speak.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the denim also had me thinking about light, because I found in your work there's a very particular light, and it's a very American light. And it sort of reminds me a bit of Hopper,
Totally.
because there's this sort of, and when you paint the surf, or like the Coke machine, it's sort of very faded looking and peeling, and all your colors have this very particular light to them. And I think it's amazing that you sort of connected denim with that, because denim, the reason why denim is so beautiful and it's so sexy is because it reflects light in a particular way. Totally. And I really like the way that goes through all of your work. There's this, you have this very keen sense of light, and I think that's really nice.
Thank you. Yeah, Hopper is definitely a huge influence, and also I'm from Los Angeles. I know it's not Hopper's region, but the light is particular, and how it does tend to fade everything.
Right.
So it's so intense. Yeah, and it's interesting to think about painting, because I also feel the same way that you feel in terms of painting. It's like I can't seem to get through a painting myself. I've tried many times. I even studied painting in undergrad, but it was like I could never get to the end of a painting and feel like I've accomplished something, and the material never really resonated to me.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting, as like we both are assuming that that's like where we should just take image production,
right?
Especially contemporarily, because like photography is such a more important role in our lives.
Yes, absolutely.
And like video and like that type of stuff, like we interact with images, and even right now we're meeting each other through video.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's kind of interesting that there's looms this sort of like historical, I don't know.
Right.
I don't know what you would call it.
But I think it's very interesting as well, because even though photography and lens-based media is just so present in our lives, it's almost become invisible. We don't even see it anymore. It's just sort of just like there. Yeah. And what I thought was very interesting about the Friends of Friends of Friends show is that everyone is very material in their work, and there's this sense of the object, even if they might be paintings, but there's a very real sense of like an object being there. Even the photography that's in the show is hanging off the wall, and it's not in a frame, and it has this sort of very physical presence as well. Yeah. And that's another quality about your work that I really sort of had an affinity with. It's the objectness of it. They're real objects, and more than that, they're more than objects. They're like machines. They seem to function or they actually do function. Like the one where the little man is falling from the skyscraper and you have to wind the crank, and it sets up this whole animated scene.
Yeah.
And even the sense of the key and the key ring, it almost looks like it's a real key that's really going to work. Or there's this real sense of mechanics with your work and the machine, and the sense of and I think it sort of activates the work in a very psychic way, because you expect, when you see a machine, you expect it to work, you expect it to do something. So you've got this sense of anticipation that something's about to happen, or something can happen, or there's a potential to something that's happening. And I find that very similar to what happens with traditional African art, in that African art was never made to be a sort of collectible object that, you know, someone could hang on the wall in their home. It always had something to do with a ritual, or it was part of a masquerade, or it was a domestic object like a stool which could be sat on. So there's also this sense of the machine in African art, and I really like that about your work as well. And that gives it that sense. It gives it a sort of resonance and a power that I think it has, on top of it being a beautiful object, which, you know, I like a lot.
Yeah. And so is your work is sometimes performative, right?
Yeah, I've done performances with my work, and that's one of the ways I activate the works. So it has a sense of being involved in something real, something that's happened.
Totally.
And, you know, in a way that I've interacted with it, or someone else has interacted with it, in the same sense that a masquerade, an African masquerade happens. The art objects are made, but they're then interacted with, and they have more of a meaning, more of a resonance like that.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And talk to me about BDSM in your work. And is there a sense of violence in relationship to?
I suppose, yeah, it is a sense of violence, but it's sort of, I was trying to communicate this sense of violence on the black body, which over its centuries long history of domination and oppression. And I was thinking I could represent through typical slave imagery, of historic slave imagery. That would be one way. But I think in a way it's too distant for it to actually mean anything to people anymore. You know, they see an image of African slavery and they feel safe because they know it's a long way away in history.
Right.
And I was thinking, how can I get this sense of violence into sort of more of a contemporary sense that people can understand how that feels? So I was thinking, well, I could use BDSM, because a lot of the objects which are used in BDSM were used in sort of, you know, African slavery, and in a lot of African religions as well. Objects like the whip are used as ritual items, and this comes from this sense of violence, this sense of. So I thought it could just be very interesting to sort of use these objects and sort of, you know, just get people to think a little bit further than they would, because people question it. And I think if you leave people with questions, that's the way the work is really going to seep into their heads, and they're going to think about what it could mean.
Definitely.
If everything is too explained, like in the way it would be if it was an African slavery scene, it's sort of too easy for people to process, and they can sort of forget about it then. So BDSM was a way of representing that sort of violence.
Totally. Well, and I guess with the banana, you know, it would leave me maybe with a question of self-violence. You know what I mean? Is there any, like, what type of conflict do you sort of exist in, maybe, with some of this stuff, with some of these questions or even topics that you're bringing up?
Yeah, it's sort of, I suppose, yeah, personally, I don't sort of like, you know, I'm not into BDSM, but I have to be a lot online looking at BDSM sites to find the source material.
Right.
And it's sort of, it's more about power dynamics. I think BDSM, it's not about pain or violence. It's really about power and who holds the power and who is powerless or who is exploited. And even though the relationships in BDSM, they're symbolic, of course, anyone who practices BDSM, it's voluntary. It's not something which is forced upon, like people who were taken as slaves were. They didn't have a choice. So I'm really interested in this idea of power and what it's like to be embedded within sort of constructs of power, like racism, exploitation, stereotypes, these sort of things. They're all ways of control, colonialism. So that's the way I felt it directly. And even though it's not a particular sense of violence, because it's just so deep that it's sort of like a chronic sort of sense of trauma in some way. That's the sort of way that, you know, I experience it, and that's what I wanted to express by using that sort of imagery.
Yeah, totally. I think that's interesting. I mean, yeah, I think it's interesting how it like continually, well, I think it's interesting how trauma will like kind of subverts itself and turns itself into other things. You know what I mean? Like potentially BDSM or, you know, addiction, and things like that. Like things that are really like, I guess, things that really tend to affect community, you know,
Yeah.
Through like not necessarily dealing with the, like directly confronting a problem, like a systemic problem or things like that.
Right.
So it's like finding like sort of personal escapes or ways of managing being out of control.
I see.
Yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And I get that sense in your series of work, The Executive Choice,
Totally.
which seems to be very much about sort of violence and self-violence, as you just mentioned.
Totally. Yeah. Well,
Is that?
Yeah. Well, because self-violence in the BDSM community, it's like the willingness to do violence or have violence done to yourself. You know what I mean? I think like there's a cost on either end, right?
Yeah,
of doing
absolutely.
violence or having violence done to you. So I think that maybe also another very interesting relationship between our work, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the executive in your work, the one who is depicted, what's your sort of what's your association to him, your personal association?
Well, I mean, it's a little bit of like catharsis, maybe for the audience in terms of seeing like a businessman kill themselves because they basically are like doing terrible things to, or at least in America, the concept of, you know, Jeff Bezos who's like exploiting culture or making so much money, basically not necessarily doing anything in response to the community.
Right.
So I kind of think of like thinking about the executive as like the archetypal Western man who like doesn't necessarily have obligations to anyone, who is like supposedly autonomous, but is really just a terrible person who's like emotionally bankrupt and should probably kill themselves. You know what I mean? But like they don't have a conscience, so it's like a fictional executive who suddenly has a conscience and like kills himself. So I don't know. I think that's sort of what I think about in relation to them.
Great. Right.
Yeah.
How many of those have you done? Is that a whole series of?
Yeah, there's maybe like 10 of them at this point. I've kind of like maybe moved away a little bit at this point, just because it's a little tough to make. They just take so much time, and they're like I have to really invest a lot into them in order to make them great objects. And sometimes they get confusing for people because they move, you know what I mean? And like people come to art exhibitions expecting, you know, something like a sculpture and a painting. So it's like, it becomes a consumption problem, like visually or even video. And in this sort of age of the internet, you know, the things that really translate to Instagram or, you know, the digital image like work the best. And like,
Yeah.
you know, as you know, probably know, sculpture is a really difficult thing to translate via the internet.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, you make it a moving sculpture. You know what I mean? It just like becomes more complicated. So it's, you know, it just is what it is.
Yeah,
So,
but I think that's what makes them so interesting, because there's so much potential there, and you're asking so many questions, and even you don't even know how to deal with it when you see it in the exhibition, because of course it's such a, because it says do not touch, but the first thing you want to do is touch it. You know, you can't actually wind the handle, and it's sort
that's
of
terrible. I didn't realize that they did that. They should be able to touch it.
so you're meant to be able to touch it and use it. Okay.
Yeah, it works. It's built to work.
Yeah, you can see it works, and you want to do it, but I'm sure they were afraid that someone was going to damage it.
Amazing. Well, maybe
but that already sets up this sort of questioning about the work as an object, and you know, who has the access to it, how can it be consumed as an object. So I think that's, you know, that's all very interesting part of it.
Well, maybe they'll see this and let people use it, or maybe we'll get a video and put it next to it.
Yeah, that's what we could get. We should get a video up online of it working. I think that would be perfect.
That's amazing. Well, I'm glad that we've like totally hit the head of that problem right here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Cool.
And I think we're actually running out of time. We've got to keep this under half an hour to keep it so it doesn't sort of crash the whole system.
Yeah.
So, yeah, well, it'll be great to see you one day, and we'll continue this conversation.
Yeah.
And good luck with the next days there in the USA. Let's hope things stay under control.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
Well, it was really great talking to you. It's super nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Awesome.
You too. Okay.
Take it easy.
Bye. You too.